morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Kensington Palace, casting long shadows across the marble floors where William had walked countless times as a child. Today those same corridors felt different, heavier somehow, as if the very walls understood the weight of what was about to unfold. He stood in his father's former study, now his own, staring at the official documents spread across the mahogany desk that had witnessed decades of royal decisions. Catherine entered quietly, her footsteps barely audible on the Persian carpet. She had always moved with grace, but today there was something different in her posture, a careful control that spoke of emotions held tightly in check. She wore a simple navy dress, the same color she had chosen for so many significant moments in their lives together. Her hair was pulled back in the elegant style that had become her signature, but William noticed the slight tremor in her hands as she smoothed an imaginary wrinkle from her skirt. "The children are with my mother," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of practiced composure. "I thought it would be better if they weren't here when we—" She paused, unable to finish the sentence that would make their decision real. William nodded, understanding without words. George, Charlotte, and Louis had always been their priority, their anchor in the storm of royal duties and public expectations. The decision they had reached after months of private discussions and sleepless nights would change everything for their family. But sometimes love meant making the hardest choices, even when they broke your heart. He walked to the window that overlooked the palace gardens, where Kate had once played with the children on sunny afternoons, their laughter echoing off the ancient stones. Those moments seemed like a lifetime ago, before the pressure had become unbearable, before the constant scrutiny had begun to steal the joy from their most precious moments. The media attention had always been intense, but lately it had reached a fever pitch that made normal family life nearly impossible. "Do you remember our wedding day?" William asked suddenly, his voice thick with emotion. "Standing in Westminster Abbey, I thought we could handle anything together. I believed love would be enough to shield us from everything else." Catherine joined him at the window, their reflections side by side in the glass like ghosts of their former selves. "Love is enough," she whispered. "That's why we're doing this. Sometimes loving someone means letting them go, even when every fiber of your being wants to hold on." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. They had found their greatest happiness in each other. Yet the very institution that had brought them together was now the thing threatening to tear them apart. The endless royal engagements, the constant travel, the pressure to be perfect public figures while trying to raise their children with some semblance of normalcy. It had all taken its toll. William turned to face her, seeing the woman who had stolen his heart at university, who had waited patiently while he found his way, who had stood by his side through scandals and celebrations alike. Her eyes, those warm brown eyes that had always been his refuge, now held a sadness that matched his own. "The palace has prepared the statement," he said quietly. "They're waiting for our final word." Catherine reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that had become second nature over their years together. "I know this is the right decision," she said, though her voice wavered slightly. "We've talked about it 100 times, but knowing something and feeling it are two very different things." They had spent countless hours in this very room, weighing their options, considering every alternative. They had consulted with trusted advisors, spoken with other royals who had faced similar crossroads, and ultimately realized that there was no perfect solution. There was only the choice between their duty to the crown and their duty to each other and their children. The weight of history pressed down upon them as they stood together in the silence. William thought of his mother, Diana, and how the pressures of royal life had affected her. He thought of his father, now king, and the sacrifices he had made throughout his life. Every generation of royals faced impossible choices, but this felt different, more personal, more devastating. Outside, London continued its busy rhythm, unaware that behind the palace walls, two people who had once represented the fairy tale romance the world craved were preparing to make a decision that would shock millions and change the course of their lives forever. The tourists taking photos at the palace gates, the reporters stationed hopefully nearby, the fans who still believed in their love story, none of them could imagine what was about to unfold. As the afternoon light began to fade, William and Catherine stood together in their shared silence, knowing that soon they would have to step into the world and face the consequences of their choice. But for now, in this moment, they were still together, still holding on to the love that had started it all, even as they prepared to say goodbye. The phone call came at 7 in the morning, just as Catherine was preparing breakfast for the children. Her mother's voice was gentle but firm on the other end of the line, offering to take George, Charlotte, and Louis for an extended visit to Berkshire. No explanations were needed. Carol Middleton had always possessed an intuitive understanding of when her daughter needed space to breathe. "Are you sure, Mum?" Catherine asked, watching through the kitchen window as William helped Louis tie his shoelaces in the garden. The sight of father and son together, heads bent over the small task, made her chest tighten with emotion. "Darling, some conversations are meant for adults only," her mother replied. "The children will be fine here. Take the time you need." Within hours, Kensington Palace felt eerily quiet without the sound of running feet and cheerful voices. Catherine wandered through rooms that suddenly seemed too large, too formal, too much like a museum and not enough like a home. She found herself in the nursery, touching the toys that lay scattered about, evidence of the normal childhood she and William had fought so hard to give their children. William discovered her there an hour later, sitting on the small reading chair where she had told countless bedtime stories. He didn't speak immediately, understanding that some moments required silence. Instead, he sat on the floor beside her, his back against the wall, and they both stared at the cheerful drawings that covered one wall, artwork their children had created during rainy afternoons. When the palace had felt more like a fortress than a home, "I keep thinking about Charlotte's question yesterday," Catherine finally said. "She asked me why we couldn't just be a normal family and go to the cinema without bodyguards." William closed his eyes, remembering his daughter's innocent words. At 8 years old, Charlotte was beginning to understand that their life was different from her friends, but she couldn't yet grasp why that difference came with such a heavy price. "What did you tell her?" "I said that sometimes special families have special responsibilities," Catherine replied. But the look in her eyes, she's starting to realize what that really means. She's starting to understand that she'll never really have the choice to be ordinary. They had always known this day would come, when their children would begin to question the gilded cage of their existence. George, as the future king, carried an even heavier burden, though at 10 he still possessed some of his childish innocence. But Charlotte and Louis would face their own challenges, always living in the shadow of the throne, their every move scrutinized, their futures predetermined by accident of birth. The decision they were contemplating wouldn't change their children's royal status, but it might give them something even more precious. Parents who were truly present, truly available, no longer torn between duty to the crown and duty to their family. "I spoke with Harry yesterday," William said quietly. His relationship with his younger brother had been complicated since Harry's departure from royal life, but recent months had brought a tentative reconciliation. "He said something that's been haunting me." Catherine looked at him, waiting. "He said that leaving was the hardest thing he ever did, but staying would have destroyed him, and that maybe, just maybe, there's more than one way to serve your family and your country." The afternoon stretched before them, like an ocean of possibility and regret. They walked through the palace grounds, past the rose garden where they had posed for so many official photographs, past the spot where George had taken his first steps while photographers captured the moment for posterity. Every corner held memories of their life together, but also reminders of how that life had been shaped and constrained by forces beyond their control. "Do you think we're being selfish?" Catherine asked as they sat on a bench overlooking the memorial garden dedicated to Diana. "Choosing our happiness over our duty?" William was quiet for a long moment, considering the question that had tormented him for months. "I think," he said finally, "that my mother would understand. She always said that the most important thing was to follow your heart, even when it led you down a difficult path." As evening approached, they found themselves back in the study where their day had begun. The official documents still lay on the desk, waiting for signatures that would change everything. But now there were other papers as well, statements from the palace, legal documents prepared by their advisors, and a letter they had written together, explaining their decision to the public who had followed their love story for so many years. The weight of what they were about to do settled over them like a heavy blanket. There would be no going back from this moment, no second chances to reconsider. Once they signed these papers, once the announcement was made, their life as they had known it would be over. But perhaps, William thought as he looked at his wife's face in the lamplight, that wasn't necessarily a tragedy. Perhaps it was simply the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Perhaps love really was worth any sacrifice, even this one. Catherine reached for the pen with steady hands, and William knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, just as they always had. The private secretary's footsteps echoed through the corridor as he approached the study, carrying the weight of protocol and centuries of tradition in his measured pace. Sir Edward Thornfield had served the royal household for 30 years, witnessing abdications, scandals, and celebrations that had shaped the modern monarchy. But nothing had prepared him for this moment. William and Catherine sat side by side on the leather sofa, their hands clasped together like teenagers facing their parents after breaking curfew. The informality of their posture stood in stark contrast to the gravity of their decision, but somehow it felt appropriate. This was, after all, fundamentally about choosing love over convention. "Your Royal Highnesses," Sir Edward began, his voice carefully neutral despite the turmoil William knew he must be feeling. "I've spoken with His Majesty. He has asked me to convey that while he is deeply saddened by your decision, he understands the pressures you have faced. He wants you to know that you will always have his love and support." Catherine's eyes filled with tears at the mention of King Charles. Despite the complexities of royal life, he had always been a kind father-in-law to her, understanding in ways that surprised many who knew him only through the media's portrayal. The thought of disappointing him added another layer of pain to an already agonizing situation. "What about the constitutional implications?" William asked, though he already knew the answer. They had spent weeks with constitutional lawyers, exploring every possible scenario, every legal precedent that might apply to their situation. "The legal framework has been prepared," Sir Edward replied, placing a leather portfolio on the coffee table between them. "The children's places in the line of succession remain unchanged. Your own status, well, that becomes more complicated. You would retain your titles but step back from all official duties indefinitely." The word indefinitely hung in the air like a sword. It meant that while the door might technically remain open for a future return, everyone in the room understood that this decision was likely permanent. Royal protocol demanded careful language, but the reality was much starker. Catherine thought about the charities she would have to abandon, the patronages she had built over years of dedicated service. The mental health initiatives, the early childhood development programs, the art projects that had given her such fulfillment, all of it would have to be handed over to others. It felt like giving away pieces of herself, but she reminded herself that her children's well-being was worth any sacrifice. "The press statement has been prepared according to your specifications," Sir Edward continued, opening the portfolio to reveal neat stacks of papers. "It emphasizes your gratitude for the support you've received and your desire to focus on family life. The official announcement will be made tomorrow at noon." Tomorrow. The finality of that timeline made everything real in a way their private discussions hadn't. By this time tomorrow, the world would know. The speculation, the theories, the endless analysis would begin. Their children would wake up to a changed world, one where their parents' decision would be debated and dissected by millions of strangers. "We need to tell the children tonight," Catherine said quietly. "They deserve to hear it from us before anyone else." William nodded, dreading the conversation almost more than any other aspect of their decision. How do you explain to a 10-year-old that his parents are choosing love over duty? How do you tell your daughter that the fairy tale she's been living is ending? Even though the love story continues, Sir Edward gathered the papers, preparing to leave them to their final hours of privacy before the storm began. "If I may," he said, pausing at the door, "I've watched this family navigate impossible situations for 3 decades. What you're doing takes tremendous courage. History will judge you kindly, I believe." After he left, William and Catherine sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The palace around them hummed with its usual activity, staff preparing for the next day's events, security teams coordinating schedules, the machinery of monarchy continuing its relentless operation. Soon all of that would carry on without them. "I keep thinking about our engagement interview," Catherine said eventually, "when they asked us about the pressures of royal life, and we were so confident that we could handle anything together." William remembered that day vividly, the excitement, the hope, the naive belief that love could conquer all obstacles. They hadn't been wrong about love's power, but they had underestimated the cost of constantly sacrificing private happiness for public duty. "We weren't wrong," he said. "We have handled it together, and we're still handling it together, even now." As darkness fell over London, they made their way to the sitting room where they would call the children. The conversation would be difficult, but it was also necessary. Their children had a right to understand why their parents were making this choice, why sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away from everything that's expected of you. The phone rang twice before Carol Middleton answered, her warm voice providing a brief moment of comfort in an otherwise overwhelming day. Soon they would hear their children's voices, and the hardest conversation of their lives would begin. But first, William reached for Catherine's hand one more time, drawing strength from the connection that had sustained them through everything. Whatever came next, they would face it as they always had, together. The video call connected with a soft chime, and suddenly the study was filled with the excited voices of George, Charlotte, and Louis. They sat together on their grandmother's sofa in Berkshire, Charlotte in the middle with her arms around her younger brother, George maintaining the dignified posture that came naturally to him even at 10 years old. "Mummy." "Daddy?" Louis called out, his 5-year-old enthusiasm infectious even through the screen. "Granny made us chocolate biscuits and we saw 3 rabbits in the garden." Catherine's heart clenched at the innocent joy in her youngest child's voice. In a few minutes, that carefree happiness would be replaced by confusion and questions she wasn't sure she could answer adequately. But they had agreed that honesty, delivered with love, was the only way forward. "That sounds wonderful, darling," Catherine managed, her voice steady despite the emotions churning inside her. "We called because Daddy and I have something important to share with you all." George's expression immediately grew serious. At 10, he had developed an intuitive understanding of adult moods, particularly when it came to family matters. Charlotte tilted her head curiously, while Louis continued to bounce slightly on the sofa, still lost in the excitement of his garden adventures. William leaned forward, making sure all 3 children could see his face clearly. "You know how much Mummy and I love you, don't you? And how much we love each other?" 3 small heads nodded in unison, though uncertainty began to creep into their expressions. "Well," William continued, choosing his words carefully, "sometimes when people love each other very much, they have to make difficult decisions to protect that love in their family." "Are you getting divorced?" Charlotte asked suddenly, her 8-year-old directness cutting straight to the heart of her fears. Catherine could see the worry in her daughter's eyes the way she unconsciously tightened her grip on Louis. "No, sweetheart," Catherine said quickly. "We're not getting divorced. We love each other very much, and we always will. But we've decided that we need to step away from some of our royal duties so we can spend more time together as a family." "What does that mean?" George asked, his young mind already working through the implications. As the future king, he understood better than his siblings how intertwined their family life was with their public roles. William took a deep breath. "It means that we won't be doing as many official engagements. We won't be traveling as much for work. We want to focus on being your parents first and everything else second." Louis looked confused. "But won't the Queen be angry?" he asked, still thinking of his great-grandmother Elizabeth, who had passed away but remained vivid in his young memory as the ultimate authority figure. "Grandpa Charles understands," Catherine explained gently. "He wants us to be happy, and he wants you to have the childhood you deserve. Sometimes grown-ups have to make changes so their families can be together more." The silence that followed stretched across the miles between London and Berkshire. Catherine could see her mother in the background, discreetly staying within earshot but giving them space for this crucial conversation. Carol's presence was reassuring, a reminder that they weren't completely alone in this decision. "Will we still live in the palace?" Charlotte asked practically. "For now, yes," William answered. "But we might move somewhere quieter, somewhere you can have more privacy and freedom." George was quiet for a long moment, processing everything they had told him. Finally, he spoke with a maturity that broke his parents' hearts. "Is this because of all the photographers and reporters? Because they follow us everywhere?" William and Catherine exchanged a glance. Their eldest child had noticed more than they had realized, had understood the constraints of their life in ways they hadn't fully appreciated. "Partly," William admitted. "We want you to be able to go to the cinema or the park or just live your lives without feeling like you're always being watched." I'd like that, Charlotte said quietly. Sophie at school gets to go shopping with just her mom, no bodyguards or anything. Louis seemed to grasp the essence of what was happening, even if the details remained unclear to him. So we'll be more like a normal family? We'll try to be, Catherine said, her voice thick with emotion. We'll always be special because of who we are, but we want to give you choices about how much of that you want in your lives. The call continued for another 20 minutes, filled with practical questions and reassurances. Yes, they would still see Grandpa Charles regularly. No, they wouldn't lose their titles. Yes, the children could still pursue whatever interests and careers they wanted when they grew up, but with less pressure and more freedom. When they finally disconnected, Catherine buried her face in her hands, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they were doing to their children's lives. Did we do the right thing? She whispered. William pulled her close, both of them emotionally drained by the conversation. Look at Charlotte's face when she talked about going shopping with just you, he said. Look at how relieved George seemed when we said he'd have more privacy. We're giving them something precious, the chance to be children first, royals second. Outside London glittered in the darkness, unaware that in a few hours everything would change. The palace staff went about their evening routines. Security teams changed shifts and tourists continued to gather at the gates, hoping for a glimpse of the royal family they had come to love. But inside the study, two parents held each other and grieved for the life they were leaving behind, even as they looked forward to the life they were choosing to build. Tomorrow would bring chaos, criticism, and endless speculation. Tonight they had each other and the knowledge that they were putting their family first, no matter the cost. The morning of the announcement dawned gray and drizzly, as if London itself was mourning what was about to unfold. Catherine stood at the bedroom window, watching the early commuters hurrying past the palace gates, umbrellas raised against the persistent rain. In a few hours, those same people would be stopping in their tracks, staring at their phones in disbelief as the news broke across the world. William found her there, 2 cups of tea in his hands, a small domestic gesture that had become even more precious as their official duties had pulled them in countless directions. They had barely slept, spending most of the night talking, reminiscing, and preparing themselves for the storm that was about to break. Any regrets? He asked softly, handing her the tea and wrapping his free arm around her waist. Catherine leaned back against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. About our decision? No. About the pain we're going to cause so many people who believed in us? Yes. They both knew that their announcement would devastate millions of people around the world who had invested emotionally in their love story. Royal watchers who had followed every detail of their romance, charitable organizations that depended on their patronage, citizens who saw them as symbols of modern monarchy, all would feel the impact of this decision. The flowers, Catherine said suddenly, noticing the crowds already gathering outside despite the early hour and the rain. People were beginning to lay bouquets at the palace gates, somehow sensing that something significant was happening. They're already mourning something they don't even know about yet. At 11 o'clock, they made their way to the blue drawing room, where a small camera crew waited to record their final official statement as working royals. The room had hosted countless royal announcements over the years, but none quite like this. The cameramen nodded respectfully as they entered, understanding the gravity of the moment. Catherine had chosen a simple cream-colored dress, one that wouldn't distract from their words. William wore a navy suit, the same color he had worn for their engagement announcement all those years ago. They sat close together on the ornate sofa, their hands clasped but visible, a united front facing an uncertain future. "We don't have to do this," William whispered, as the crew made final adjustments. "We could still change our minds." Catherine squeezed his hand. "We do have to do this. For them," she said, thinking of their children. "For us. For everyone who deserves to see that choosing love over duty isn't always a failure. Sometimes it's the bravest thing you can do." The red light on the camera began to blink, and suddenly they were no longer just William and Catherine, private individuals making a personal choice. They were the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, speaking to the world for what might be the last time in their official capacity. "Good morning," William began, his voice steady and clear. "Catherine and I wanted to speak to you directly about a decision we have made regarding our roles within the royal family." Catherine took over, her training in public speaking evident in her calm delivery. For the past decade, we have been honored to serve the Crown and the people of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth. The support and affection you have shown us has been overwhelming and deeply appreciated. However, William continued, we have come to the difficult conclusion that we need to step back from our official duties to focus on our roles as parents and partners. This decision has not been made lightly, and we understand it will come as a shock to many. The words they had rehearsed dozens of times seemed to hang in the air, each syllable weighted with consequence. Catherine could feel her heart pounding, but her voice remained steady as she delivered the next portion. We remain committed to supporting His Majesty the King and the monarchy, but we believe we can best serve our family and our country by creating space for a more private life. Our children deserve the opportunity to grow up with the freedom to make their own choices about their futures. We are grateful beyond words for the incredible experiences we have shared with you, William added. The charitable organizations we have supported, the communities we have visited, the individuals whose stories have touched our hearts. These connections will remain with us always. The camera captured every nuance of their expressions, the way Catherine's eyes glistened with unshed tears, the slight tremor in William's voice as he spoke about their children. This wasn't a polished royal performance, this was raw emotion, carefully controlled but unmistakably genuine. We ask for your understanding and your privacy as we navigate this transition, Catherine concluded. Our love for each other and for our family has guided us to this decision, and we hope that love will continue to guide us as we write the next chapter of our lives. When the camera stopped rolling, the silence in the room was deafening. The crew quietly packed their equipment, understanding that they had just witnessed something historic. Not a scandal or a crisis, but a conscious choice to prioritize personal happiness over public expectation. As the doors closed behind the last technician, William and Catherine found themselves alone in the ornate room that had seen so much history. In exactly 1 hour, their recorded message would be broadcast to the world, and there would be no going back. It's done, Catherine whispered, the weight of finality settling over them both. William nodded, pulling her into his arms. It's done, he agreed. And now we wait to see what comes next. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but neither of them noticed. They were too busy holding each other, preparing for the moment when their private decision would become public knowledge, when the world would learn that sometimes even fairy tales must end for real love to begin. The world erupted at exactly 12 noon. Within minutes of the broadcast, social media platforms crashed under the weight of millions of simultaneous reactions. News channels around the globe interrupted their regular programming with breaking news alerts. The phrase William and Kate began trending worldwide, accompanied by a flood of emotions ranging from heartbreak to support to outrage. Inside Kensington Palace, William and Catherine sat in their private sitting room, watching the coverage unfold on the large television screen. They had turned off their phones after the first 100 calls and messages, choosing instead to witness the world's reaction together, in silence. The BBC is calling it unprecedented, Catherine observed, watching the news anchor struggle to maintain composure while discussing the implications of their decision. They keep using that word. Everything about our situation has been unprecedented, William replied. A future king choosing family over duty? It's not exactly covered in the constitutional handbook. The coverage was intense but surprisingly, not entirely negative. Royal commentators who had spent years analyzing their every move were now dissecting their decision with a mixture of shock and grudging respect. Several mentioned the pressures modern royals faced, the impossibility of balancing personal happiness with public service in an age of social media and constant scrutiny. A knock at the door interrupted their vigil. Sir Edward entered, carrying a stack of newspapers that wouldn't hit the stands until the next morning but had already been printed with emergency headlines. The initial reaction from Downing Street has been supportive, he reported. The Prime Minister issued a statement calling your decision deeply personal and expressing the government's continued respect for your service to the country. Catherine picked up one of the newspapers, staring at the headline that read, "Love over Duty," in bold letters beneath a photo of them from their wedding day. The image was a stark reminder of how hopeful and naive they had been, believing they could have it all. "What about the charities?" she asked. It was the question that had been haunting her all day. "The organizations that depend on our patronage?" "They're being contacted individually," Sir Edward assured her. "Many have already issued statements expressing their understanding and gratitude for your years of service." The Mental Health Foundation released a particularly moving message about respecting your need to prioritize your family's well-being. As the afternoon wore on, messages began arriving from unexpected sources. Harry and Meghan sent a heartfelt note expressing their support and understanding. Other European royals who had faced similar pressures in their own lives offered private words of encouragement. Even some members of Parliament, who might have been expected to criticize their decision, instead praised their honesty and courage. But the most meaningful reactions came from ordinary people. Social media was filled with messages from parents who understood the desire to put family first, from individuals who had watched their own relationships crumble under professional pressure, from young people who admired their willingness to choose authenticity over expectation. "Listen to this," William said, reading from his tablet. "A mother from Manchester wrote, 'Thank you for showing my daughters that even princesses can choose love over duty. You've taught them that their happiness matters more than what others expect from them.'" Catherine wiped away tears as she read similar messages. Here's one from a teacher in Scotland. "I've spent my career trying to teach children that their mental health and family relationships should come first. Today, you've given me the perfect example to share with them." As evening approached, they made the drive to Berkshire to reunite with their children. The journey through the countryside felt like traveling between two different worlds, leaving behind the chaos and speculation of London for the quiet normalcy of family life. George, Charlotte, and Louis were waiting in the garden when they arrived, having spent the day largely unaware of the global reaction to their parents' announcement. To them, it was simply another visit to Granny's house, another chance to play without the constant presence of security teams and photographers. "Mommy, Daddy?" Louis ran toward them with the uninhibited joy that only a 5-year-old could possess. For a moment, as Catherine scooped him up in her arms, all the weight of their decision seemed worth it for this single moment of uncomplicated happiness. Charlotte and George approached more cautiously, clearly sensing the emotional undercurrents of the day. "Are you sad?" Charlotte asked perceptively, studying her parents' faces. "We're lots of things all at once," Catherine replied honestly. "Sad about leaving some parts of our old life behind, but excited about spending more time with you." That evening, as they sat around Carol Middleton's kitchen table sharing a simple family dinner, the magnitude of what they had accomplished began to sink in. They had stepped away from the most prestigious positions in the country, given up roles that millions would envy, all for the chance to be present for moments like this. "Daddy," George said quietly as William tucked him into bed, "some of the kids at school have parents who are divorced because they work too much. You and Mummy won't get divorced now, will you?" William's heart broke a little at the worry in his son's voice. "No, George. We made this decision so we could stay together, so we could be the family we want to be." As night fell over the Berkshire countryside, William and Catherine walked hand in hand through the garden where their children had played so freely during the day. The rest of the world was still processing their announcement, still debating and analyzing their choice. But here, in this moment, they had achieved something precious. A few hours of the normal family life they had sacrificed so much to obtain. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more difficult conversations, and the complex work of building a life outside the royal spotlight. But tonight they were simply parents who had chosen their children's happiness over public expectation, partners who had chosen each other over everything else that might have pulled them apart. 6 months later, Catherine stood in the garden of their new home in Norfolk, watching William teach Louis how to plant sunflower seeds in the rich earth. The cottage they had chosen was modest by royal standards, but perfect for their transformed life. Large enough for their family, but small enough to feel cozy, private enough to shield them from unwanted attention, but close enough to London for necessary visits. The transition had not been easy. There had been weeks of intense media scrutiny, constitutional meetings, and painful conversations with organizations they had to leave behind. The public reaction had evolved from shock to understanding, to something approaching admiration for their courage to choose differently. Opinion polls showed that while some criticized their decision, a surprising majority of parents supported their choice to prioritize family. "Mummy, look," Charlotte called from across the garden, where she was hanging laundry on the line. A simple domestic task that had become a joy rather than a chore. "I can do it just like you showed me." These small moments had become the treasures of their new life. Saturday morning breakfast that lasted for hours because there was nowhere else to be. School pickup runs without security details. Bedtime stories read without the pressure of early morning engagements the next day. They had traded grand state dinners for family game nights, official portraits for candid photos taken with their own cameras. William emerged from his study, where he had been working on a book about conservation, his first independent project since stepping back from royal duties. The publisher had been skeptical at first, wondering if anyone would take seriously a conservation book by a former working royal. But William's passion for the subject, freed from the constraints of diplomatic protocol, had produced something authentic and compelling. The children's school called, he announced, settling beside Catherine on the garden bench they had bought at a local antique shop. George has been selected for the debating team, and Charlotte wants to try out for the school play. These were the victories they celebrated now, not successful state visits or well-received speeches, but their children's growing confidence in pursuing their own interests without the weight of royal expectation. George was developing into a thoughtful, articulate young man who spoke passionately about environmental issues. Charlotte had discovered a love for drama and storytelling that flourished in the school environment. Louis was simply a happy 5-year-old who could play in puddles without photographers capturing every splash. The adjustment to private life had required learning new skills. Catherine had taken a part-time position with a mental health charity, work that felt more meaningful because she had chosen it freely rather than accepting it as part of her royal duties. William had become involved with local conservation projects, getting his hands dirty in ways that had never been possible during formal royal engagements. Their marriage, rather than suffering from the loss of their shared royal role, had strengthened. The pressure that had once threatened to tear them apart was gone, replaced by the simple pleasure of building a life together based on their own choices rather than external expectations. "Do you miss it?" Catherine asked, a question that had become a regular part of their evening conversations. The pageantry, the importance, feeling like we were making a difference on a grand scale? William considered this, watching their children play together in the fading daylight. "I miss some of the work," he admitted. "I miss the conservation summits, the feeling of being able to influence policy. But I don't miss the constant scrutiny, the impossible balancing act, the feeling that we could never just be ourselves." They had maintained their relationship with King Charles, who had initially been hurt by their decision, but had come to understand and even respect their choice. He visited regularly, delighting in the opportunity to be simply a grandfather rather than a monarch when he was with his grandchildren. The formal distance that royal protocol had once required had been replaced by genuine family warmth. "I keep thinking about that family we met at the village fair last month," Catherine said. "The parents who recognized us but didn't make a fuss, just thanked us for showing them that it was okay to make difficult choices for their family's happiness." That encounter had crystallized something important for both of them. They had not simply walked away from their responsibilities. They had used their platform to model a different kind of courage, the bravery required to prioritize personal authenticity over public expectation. As the evening star appeared in the darkening sky, they called their children inside for dinner, the kitchen filled with the cheerful chaos of family life, homework spread across the table, Louis's artwork covering the refrigerator, the comfortable routine of an ordinary family living an extraordinary love story. "I love you," William said quietly as they worked together to clear the dishes, a simple domestic moment that had become profound in its ordinariness. "I love you too," Catherine replied, the same words they had spoken countless times over the years, but somehow more meaningful now that they had been chosen freely, without the weight of duty or public expectation. Outside, the Norfolk countryside settled into peaceful darkness, shielding their small cottage from the wider world. Inside, a family that had once belonged to the nation had claimed themselves for each other, proving that sometimes the greatest act of service is knowing when to step away. Their fairy tale had not ended. With their departure from royal life, it had simply transformed into something more precious and more real, a love story built on choice rather than circumstance, sustained by authentic connection rather than public performance. In choosing each other over everything else, they had not lost their kingdom, they had found their home.